The key employment numbers are about to be released by the Australian Bureau of Statistics. Our business editor, Ross Greenwood, is standing by with the details. Ross, has it dropped just yet? How's it going to look?
Hasn't dropped. The interesting part about this is that the last month's number, of course, 3.9%, and this forecast is for some 25,000 jobs to be created during the month. In fact, it's come in dead flat. So the unemployment rate, which had been forecast to be down to 3.8%, has come in at 3.9%, exactly the same as it has the previous month. Now, the interesting thing about this as we go through, we'll find out the reasons why it's done this and exactly what sort of is the latest information about it. But the reality is that it would appear as though maybe this is not necessarily the great news that Australians wanted, and that is that more jobs being created on an ongoing basis. So as we go through this, you can see that the ABS is saying, as I just look through this, unemployment rate remains at 3.9%. The number of unemployed people has increased by 7,800, and so this is an important thing. So this is, you can see here, the historical trend of unemployment. It has continued to fall. The number of employed people increased by 60,600 people, and so employment is now significantly higher. But the issue is also it's full-time employment that's increased by 69,000. Part-time employment has actually decreased by 8,700. So the story here is because employers are finding it tougher to get workers, they're actually committing to more full-time workers in Australia. What this means, Ash, is really a situation where the job shortages or the skills shortages is really, if you like, forcing the hand of the employers to give more permanence to many workers. So the real problem in Australia right now is the lack of part-time workers and short-term workers, and that's of course caused because we're not seeing the number of migrants coming to the country, which is still at around about a quarter of the level that it was before the pandemic.
So Ross, more broadly, what does this say about the resilience of our economy when we know we're facing these higher energy prices and also the interest rate challenge?
Well, the one thing is, I guess you would imagine that if there was significant pressure to try and get more skilled workers, that ultimately would mean higher wages. Now, we already saw an increase in the minimum wage, but if there's pressure on wages, it obviously puts pressure on inflation as well. Now, what you're starting to see overseas, though, is a slightly different story. And that story is really about perhaps looking at the way in which the labour forces in other parts of the world are starting to come under some pressure. Here, it hasn't happened as yet. But what you're seeing also here is the participation rate is again higher. So if I go down to that participation rate, which is really kind of important because the more people in the workforce, the better again. So it's increased for men to 71.2%, which is the highest that I've seen on record. For women, it's increased to 62.3%. So the idea, even with the childcare packages that are being talked about by politicians right now, is to try and encourage more women into the workforce to take pressure off wages and to take pressure off the skills shortages, and especially why we don't have the level of migration that we had before the pandemic.
So in terms of how this fits in with what we're seeing globally, Ross, the US Federal Reserve raised rates by 0.75% overnight, the biggest jump as we've been reporting today in 28 years.
Yeah.
What can we read into these numbers about the future of inflation and rates here in Australia?
Well, what you can read into it is it's not taking any pressure off wages to rise. And so the point is that up until now, private sector in particular and government sector especially have been able to keep a cap on wages. But as new enterprise bargaining agreements are entered into, and especially as the minimum wage arrangement has come through, what you start to see is here's the minimum wage decision here, 5.2%. So you can see $40 per week is, what people were picking up. That, again, will flow right through the rest of the community, especially where there are skills shortages. And so that, again, is going to put even more pressure on the Reserve Bank to try and play a bit of catch-up, especially with the US Federal Reserve, which is a reason why when the Reserve Bank next meets, which is going to be in July, it is expected it will raise rates by at least 0.5%. And now, given what the United States has done, you couldn't even discount the prospect of a rate rise of 0.75% in that month, simply so that Australia does not fall too far behind the rest of the world, as it were.
Ross Greenwood, we always appreciate your analysis, especially on the hop like that, looking at that data as it's coming through live here on Sky News. Thank you so much, Ross. And